Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. Story number 1. My experience was of being killed in a tractor accident when I was 15 years old and becoming a spirit, standing next to my uncle as he continued driving the tractor, unaware that I'd been pulled into the farm tractor's wheel and axle. He was driving while keeping an eye on the potato rows to avoid running over them. When he heard a voice on his left side call out his name, he stopped the tractor and got off to look at the sprayers, and I just stood there watching him. The next thing I know, he's calling my name and finding my body wrapped around the axle. From there, I had blackouts of him caring for my body and me watching, then merging into the body and talking to him as he carried my body out of the potato field to the truck and to the hospital. And then I woke up in a hospital room to hear the doctors say it's a miracle I'm alive, but they have to amputate my leg. I really awoke then and felt for my leg, telling the doctor that he was not going to take my leg. They didn't. They said I'd be dead by now, but I'm 4 years past my death date, so I'll keep going until death takes me again. The second time I died was an incredible experience. I was burned to death in a gasoline fire, and the nurse who was there the entire time trying to save my life ended up praying to God to take me to heaven, which he did, and I felt my spirit leave the body and go through the ceiling and up into space. It was dark and silent at first, and I felt like a balloon floating upwards. I was ecstatic. I didn't feel the agony of being skinned alive and then cooked to death. Then I started hearing voices, a lot of them at first. They were crying, and I became concerned as I wondered who they were, why they were crying, and why I was hearing it. Then I realized I was still flying up, and the voices were becoming fainter and fewer. The farther I traveled, the less I could hear. Then one voice said clearly, "I love you." It then fell silent. At first, I felt myself leaning to the left, as if I were leaning back toward where I heard the voice. But then I remembered my pain and turned back forward, away from the earth. As I moved away from earth, all I could see was darkness. I could think and feel comfort, and I wasn't bothered by the fact that everything was dark and peaceful. I see a speck of light. Then, as if I blinked, I see a wall of starlights, and then I'm in them. I feel as if I've come to a halt. I feel like I'm floating in space with a smile from ear to ear. And I look around and see all the stars around me and think, I don't need air, water, hot or cold. I'm in space and I'm at peace, and the peace of being there was truly divine. The next thing I know, a star is getting bigger and brighter than all the others, and I want it to be the star of my next life, and I'm getting even more excited to see and be a part of it. And it's getting bigger and brighter even faster, and I'm wondering if it's moving towards me or me moving towards it. So I looked around to see the other stars were a blur, and I knew it was me moving towards the star to be the star in my next life, and I got even more excited when I felt someone come up from behind me, placing his hands under my arms and picking me up, and I giggled and laughed like air pockets in a plane or the sudden drop of a roller coaster ride. I laughed and giggled as I felt myself being drawn away from the star of my next life. I could feel myself being drawn in and carried like a baby in our Father's arms, and I was at ease and peaceful, and I fell asleep immediately. When I awoke, I could see my lower half was a ghost, and I was merging into a body, and I thought I was coming to life in a physical heaven, and I was excited to be a part of it. And as my ghost was completing into the body, I could feel myself take a deep breath to begin my life, and I sat up and looked around, and I saw I was all alone, and I wondered where all the other angels were. I got out of bed and went looking for them, and when I found them, they screamed and shouted at me to get away because I was a ghost. So I walked outside and saw it was night outside, and saw the shadows of the trees, and looked up and saw the stars in the night sky, and remembered being there, and I looked back down, wondering what this place where I am is. Then this guy approached me and told me that I'd been dead for a long time and that an ambulance was on its way to take my body to the morgue. He kept asking me how it felt to be dead for so long. I then asked him if this was heaven, and he said no. I became very curious about what heaven was like, and I became even more concerned about what this place was and why it wasn't heaven. Then, my girlfriend at the time came out and told me to come on because we were going to the hospital. I was afraid I'd go back into shock before the ambulance arrived, so she drove me there. We ended up in the hospital, and they wanted to skin graft my body, but I refused and asked how I could heal on my own and alone for 2 years, and burn bandages were my best friends for 2 years. And I don't have any scars, and I was covered in burns from head to ankles. It's been 21 years, and all I have are memories of that night. At the time, I was 27 years old. After about a year, I began to wake up in the middle of the night and write large, bold letters on large paper, which I then sent to senators, lawyers, and others. I couldn't figure out why there was such a strong desire to share pieces of paper that only talked about world peace. It turned out to be several hundred of them. To put it another way, it cost me both my marriage and my business. The writings had ceased for a time, but they have recently resumed. I am now 49 years old. Story number 2. I underwent atrial fibrillation ablation. My doctor came in to speak with me the night before the procedure. He asked if I was willing to go through with the procedure, and I told him I didn't feel good about it. He reassured me that I would be fine because I was young and in good health. The procedure began the following morning. I was placed under general anesthesia for the next 9 hours. The doctor discovered a cluster of hot spots early in the procedure, which are bad areas that cause interruptions in the electrical pathways of the heart and atrial fibrillation. He ablated the first area before moving on to the second, causing my heart to stop beating. It eventually restarted on its own. He proceeded to the third area and my heart stopped once more, but this time it did not restart. I was in asystole or had collapsed. During this time, I heard people rushing around, instruments hitting a metal tray, and someone saying, "Oh my God, it's a very high-degree heart block." I knew what this meant, but I wasn't scared. I just thought, whatever, because I wasn't in any pain. I was somewhere else. I'm not sure where I was, but I was warm and comfortable, and I couldn't see anything except a white room with no door or windows, nothing but white. I felt complete and utter love, unlike any other love I'd ever known. I had the impression that I was not alone, but no one came forward. I didn't care if I lived or died. I awoke several hours later, and the doctor told me what had happened. I needed an external pacemaker to keep the lower half of my heart beating enough to keep me alive. I was in critical condition for the next 6 days. The doctor had hoped that things would improve because of swelling in the ablated areas, but nothing changed. I needed a permanent pacemaker implanted. Before the pacemaker was implanted, the doctor asked if I had any questions, and I blurted out, "Just don't let me die." I quickly made other excuses for my statement, as if I had no control over it at all. The second procedure was performed while the patient was sedated. Everything went well, and I returned home later. This entire experience had occurred to me after I returned home. I had nightmares and panic attacks that I'd never had before, and memories of what I'd gone through returned to me. The nightmares faded as the memories became clearer, but I still struggled with panic attacks at random times for a few months after returning home. Unfortunately, as my memories became clearer, I felt guilty for not wanting to return because of my family and what it would have done to them. I felt very selfish because my only child, who means the world to me, would have been without his mother, my husband would have been without his wife, and my parents would have had to deal with the loss of another child. I would have been 1.5 months older than my brother was when he died. I was very ill during my hospitalization, but I don't know why I didn't think of all these things right after the incident. Something strange is going on. Every nurse who came in every hour would ask if I'd ever slept because I was always awake. I was also awake while they watched the camera. How does one survive 6 days on little to no sleep? I have no idea how this is possible, especially given my current state. Why did I start having nightmares after the experience was so pleasant? It could have been related to the guilt, as well as thoughts about what if I didn't survive. As a nurse who cares for patients who are dying, I believe it is much more difficult for those left behind than it is for the person who's dying. Why? I know you don't feel pain, because pain is only felt by the physical body, but the soul of the person has disconnected from the physical body and no longer suffers. Do I believe there's life after death? Yes,